In this video, I will present you my solution. So let's jump into Visual Studio and try to implement the rest of the CRUD operations for employees. So we have implemented the get and the post. We are going to implement the get by employees first. So let's go ahead and do that. App.map, map to get. And this root template is going to be slightly different. So we are going to allow user to enter the ID, and we can add a constraint over here so that the ID will always be integer. And now we need to provide corresponding parameter to accept the ID into our endpoint handler. And then over here, we can write it in one line or write it in two lines, but let's choose to write it in one line. We're going to get the employee from the employee repository. We have a get employee by ID, and let's double check the definition. The implementation of this is just going to use link to return the employee. So there's a possibility that this is null. So when it's null, so let's try to do this. Return employee. If employee is not null, then this is the sending pass. We're going to use the type results .ok to return the employee. Otherwise, we are going to use the problem details, just like this. So what we can do is we can copy and paste it over here. Maybe we can format it slightly better. So break it from here, and then perhaps break it from here. And we need to specify the correct error message now. And we can say employee with the ID doesn't exist. And we need to use string interpolation. So just add a $sign at the beginning. All right, that implements our get by ID endpoint. For this endpoint, we don't need to use with parameter validations because the ID, we are not going to validate the ID with data annotation, right? So let's jump over to the next one, which is the put endpoint. So app.map put. And for this one, we are going to hit the employees /ID. So what we're saying here is that we're updating the employee with this ID specified in the path, right? In the root template. In the root. So here, of course, we need to receive that from the parameter. We need to allow the SPDNI core framework to pass that employee JSON over to the parameter. So this is the model binding. So I'm going to say employee. So here we allow the framework to pass the employee information from the HTTP body to the endpoint handler as a parameter. So we can call employee and then we close this bracket. Now remember the definition of the employee repository. So if we're trying to update it, and if it's not null, and if the employee exists, then it's going to return true. Otherwise, it's going to return false. Okay, so you can change this logic if you want to be very specific. Otherwise, you can just use it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just say return employees repository and update employee. And now before we pass the employee to the update employee method here, we need to validate like the ID that is passed in. So if ID is not equal to employee.id, then we need to return a validation error, right? Just like this one. So return validation problem. And then we are going to say here is that employee ID is not the same as ID. Some kind of message like this would be okay. So after this validation, we know that the ID is definitely equal to employee.id. Then we can pass the employee object to the employee repository. So if this is returned true, then we should return type results no content. This is the proper response here. And then if there is an error, then we can return validation problem, just like this one. So change it over here. And then again, go to employees repository. And so when do we return false? So employee doesn't exist would be the main cause here. So we're going to say employee doesn't exist. Okay, so we have some problem over here. We're going to do the lambda expression properly. Okay, so now we don't have the problem anymore. So for this validation, we're returning validation problem employee ID is not the same as ID. Here, this one, if everything goes well, we're going to return HTTP 204, no content. Otherwise, we are returning the validation problem again, and this is employee doesn't exist. Okay, so this is the HTTP put. And the next one is going to be for deleting. We're going to map delete. And this also goes to the same path here. And now we need to map it to the ID parameter. And this time we need to implement the lambda expression properly. Okay. And over here, we're going to have the same validation as the get by ID. So, and perhaps we already implemented the validation in the delete method here. Okay, so if it exists, if the ID exists, then I'm going to remove the employee. So I want to just use that directly. We can say return employee repository dot delete employee by ID. And if it's successful, we're going to return type results dot OK. Otherwise, usually the object that is deleted should be passed into this OK helper function. But because the way that we implemented this delete function, we get it from here. So it looks like this implementation is not appropriate. So we can change it to have it pass in the employee object. So employee, and then here, if the employee is not now, then it's going to remove it. Otherwise, it's going to return false. So we can then use this. But first of all, we need to get the employee. So employee equals employee repository get by ID. And then we can use this employee object right here. And if everything goes well, so it has a green squiggly line here because it's saying that this could be null. So let's go over here and make sure that we have a question mark over here. All right, that should solve the problem. Coming back. Okay, the green squiggly line is gone. And now if this returns true, then we're going to return type results.ok, and then we pass in the employee object. All right, so that's the proper way to implement a delete API here. And otherwise, we are going to return the error message here with validation problem. And that is the same as this. So let's copy this one and paste it over here. Okay, and then let's format it properly. I like it to be broken like this. All right, so this looks like it's implemented properly already. The problem with the validation problem that is implemented this way is that the status code is not provided. Okay, so we gotta provide the status code, especially for the endpoint like this. So we are looking for the employee, but we can't find it. Usually we return not found. But there's heat arguments that not found should only be returned when we're trying to do routing. But other people say that not found should be a standard way if we can't find the object that we're looking for. So it's really up to you how you would interpret it when you work on your own project. If your whole team agrees with one approach, then go with that approach. Otherwise, you have two options, right? You can return the HTTP 400, which is bad request, or you can try to agree on with the not found. In this course, I'm going to use not found. So over here, as the second parameter, I can say status code equals 404. Okay, so this is not found. And then for this one, if the employee is not provided, then I'm going to specify status code as 400. Let me also break this down like this. And then for this one, it says employee ID is not the same as ID. I'm going to provide status code 400. So this is bad request. And for this one, it's going to be 404. Last but not least, this one is also 404. All right, so we have everything implemented and it's time to give it a try. Let's run the application. All right, our application is running. We have the home page as HTML, which is pretty weird for a web application. This is only for demonstration purpose. And then get over here, we're trying to get our employees. So first of all, we get all of the employees and we got all of the employees. And secondly, we're trying to get, let's say, the first employee, and we got the first employee. And what if I enter number 4, which doesn't exist, and I get the proper response with the status code 404, and that is the correct status code, right? And then let's try to use Postman to test the other endpoints. So let's copy the port number and go to Postman. We're going to test the add. If we provide null and click on send, we get not found. That's because the path is wrong. So let's change to correct path and click on send again. So this is 400 bad request. This is correct. And let's change this to proper way. So change this to actually remove the ID, the proper JSON, and then click on send again. Now we have Tom Anderson added. So this is okay. And if we try to get a employee by ID, that one we already tested. So let's test the update employee. We're going to update number 4 manager, and we are basically just changing the salary. And here we need to specify the ID to make them the same ID. So what if I just put in a different ID and click on send button? So now it says could not send request. It's probably because the port number is wrong. So let's go to the correct one. Copy the port number. Let's go to put request and paste it over here and click on send button. All right, so we have 400. That is correct because the employee ID is not the same as ID. Right, so let's go over here and update it to 4. And now let's click on send and we have 204 no content. All right, so let's get all of the employees over here. Make sure the port number is correct. Click on send and let's check the number 4. Okay, the salary is updated. So our previous update was working correctly. Now the last one is delete. So if authorization header isn't being used right now, so it doesn't really matter. So here we're trying to delete number 4. What if I put 5 and click on send? Then, well, again, port number needs to be changed. So try again, click on send. Now I get employee with ID 5 doesn't exist and it gives me 404, so everything looks correct. So I'm going to change it to number 4 and click on send again, and it says that 200, right? And it returns this. Basically, the employee is deleted correctly. Let's go to employees endpoint and try to get all of the employees again. And now I have only 3 employees. So the delete endpoint also works. So everything passed testing and everything seems to be working as we expected. And that's my answer for the assignment. Before we finish a recording of this video, I want to point out one thing. So let's go back to the endpoints. You can see that a lot of stuff, a lot of code is about the validation of the input, right? So these input already passed the data annotation validation. Everything is properly constructed. However, the ID may not exist. This ID may not correspond to this ID. The majority of the code here is about input validation. And it's kind of crowding and polluting the logic that is supposed to be really inside the endpoint handler here. So for now, it's okay. But later, we're going to talk about filter pipeline. And filter pipeline is another technology in ASP.NET Core framework that can help us to extract this kind of validation code outside of the endpoint handler so that our endpoint handler is going to be much cleaner. But we're going to learn about filter pipelines later. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I will see you in the next one.